Welcome, everyone. My name is Vanessa de la Torre, and I'm the financial officer for NAHJ New England, serving alongside our president, Cindy, and board members, Cristela, Sabrina, and Natalie, who are representing here today. We're so honored that Shereen Marisol Meraji accepted our invitation for EnHoraBuena. This is a new series that our chapter created to celebrate and hear and learn from the very best in journalism, our gente, while also raising money for scholarships to support the next generation of journalists. Shereen was on our dream list of potential speakers. She has one of the most recognizable and distinctive voices in audio and has reported on issues of race, racism, and racial identity formation since 2013. Shereen, of course, was most recently co-host and senior producer of NPR's award-winning Code Switch podcast. She was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard this past year, and now she's back on the West Coast to start her new job as an assistant professor of race and journalism at UC Berkeley. We're so fortunate that we have Shereen here and the incredible Karen Grigsby Bates to moderate this conversation. Karen is a senior correspondent for NPR and the founding member of the Code Switch team. She's also a noted author among her many talents. Thank you so much, Karen.
Happy to be here.
Great. And a quick shout out to our sponsors for this event, GBH News in Boston and the New England News Collaborative, which I lead as executive editor. We're a collaboration of 9 public media stations working together in the New England region. If you have any questions during this hour, and we hope you do, please drop them in the chat. Don't be shy. We want to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to get to Karen.
Thank you and welcome everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day to talk with us and listen to us. And because we have an hour and we don't want to chip away at any of it, we're going to get started. I want to give you sort of a little roadmap for what we're going to do. Shereen and I are going to talk about her illustrious career and about the founding of Code Switch and about race in the newsroom for about 40 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. And so if you have questions or if you think of questions as you go along, be sure to keep them in mind. And for the rest of the time, we're going to answer you. So we'll get started. Shereen, I'm going to do what the Red Queen advised Alice in Wonderland to do, which is begin at the beginning and
take it all the way back.
Take it all the way back to when you were in pull-ups. Why radio? You know, lots of people say they want to go into journalism. Very few people say they want to go into audio journalism. Everybody wants to be on TV or maybe do a magazine or television. You have wanted to, ever since I've known about you, do audio journalism. Why?
I actually fell into this. So I wish I had a backstory where it was like, ever since I was a little girl, I listened to the radio and I wanted to be that person behind the mic. That was not my entree into audio journalism. I actually thought I was going to be a teacher. My Titi Juana and my Uncle Alfonso were both bilingual educators here in California. And I spent a lot of time in their classrooms, like preparing over the summer with them and just feeling like that was the coolest job in the world. And so I went to San Francisco State University. As an undergrad, I studied Raza Studies. And, you know, I was going to get my CBEST and I was going to then get my credential, and I had my whole plan laid out. But while I was at San Francisco State, there was a job opening at a place called the National Radio Project out of Oakland, California. And it was a job for an administrative assistant. And I applied for it and I got the job. And it was me being there, answering phones, cataloging cassette tapes, and then later cataloging cassette tapes and later CDs. That's when I was like, oh, you know, just listening to what they were doing in the other room, because it was a tiny nonprofit, listening to them review interviews that they did. And by the way, this was a show called Making Contact, which was a public affairs show, and they talked a lot about issues that we talk about on Code Switch, race, the wealth gap, environmental racism, environmental justice. Like these were all of the subjects that they were talking about on the show. And I was very interested in those things personally. And I thought, well, that's way more fun than answering phones and cataloging the tapes. I want to do what they do. And so being a small nonprofit that they were always looking for volunteer help. And they were like, well, do you want to learn how to digitally edit audio? So this was back in the day when people were cutting
Actual
tape,
tape.
physical tape, exactly. And so they were really pioneers in editing audio digitally. This was in the late 90s. And so they taught me how to do that. And so that was my first step into audio and radio, was like listening to this, listening to the program, and then editing audio. So I almost entered it on the technical side. I got really, really good at that. And then running the soundboard, et cetera. And then I was doing my own interviews, and I thought, wow, this is really powerful. This is a form of teaching, but on a much grander scale. And so I just kept doing that. And I didn't go to journalism school. I just kind of kept at it step by step. But it all started there when I was an undergrad at San Francisco State. I was a Raza Studies major at San Francisco State, which is now Latina Studies. I'm
Strangely
sure it'll be
prescient.
Latinx Studies
Yeah.
next. Yeah.
You were at NPR a few times. You came and you left, and you came and you left. What did you do the first time you were at NPR? And what made you leave and what brought you back?
So there was, there is someone named Doug Mitchell who ran the Next Generation Radio Project, and he knew about my work from the National Radio Project in Oakland. And he actually reached out to me in 2001, and he said, hey, Shereen, there's this thing called the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and we would love for you to come and have a mentor and do a story that could possibly run on NPR, on a public radio station. And at that time I was doing community radio. So the show that I was working on, called Making Contact, out of the National Radio Project, it was on about 200 community radio stations. So KPFA, KPFK, really small community oriented radio stations. And NPR was very like, whoa, that was the big time. And actually in that world, it was seen as almost like corporate radio.
Yeah, sure.
So yes, the big time called me, and Doug Mitchell, and he said, hey, we have this program where we set up mentors and mentees, and they do a boot camp for a week at the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. I would love for you to apply. I think if you applied, I've heard your work. I think if you applied, you would get in. And so I said, okay, sure. And at that point, honestly, Karen, I had not listened to NPR at all. Like I had listened to KPFA, KPFK, community radio in the Bay Area. In the Bay, it's KPFA. Now I've been in LA for so long. I'm like, which one is it?
You got your call letters mixed up. Yeah.
I know, I get my call letters mixed up. But so I was listening to that. I was listening to hip hop on KMEL, which, shout out to Chewy Gomez. He was like a longtime DJ at KMEL in the Bay. And I wasn't familiar with public radio. So anyway, I applied for this thing, and I got it. And they hooked me up with Mandalit del Barco as my mentor. And we did a story in Arizona. That's where the conference was. And the story was about migrants who were traveling through the Sonoran Desert and dying en route. And this was in 2001. And so we went out to the desert. We spoke to migrants. We spoke to the Border Patrol. It was just an incredible story. We worked on it over a week together. I wrote it, voiced it, did all of this stuff. And Latino USA liked it so much that they bought it. And they paid me for the story, and they aired the story. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And people wrote emails, and somebody said that they pulled over to listen to the story, and there was this power in being able to tell that story on that platform, specifically on Latino USA, that I thought, oh, is this what this is about? This is incredible. Like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And then that's what I thought. I thought, I'm going to be a reporter. I'm going to report on Latino issues, and I'm going to do it immediately. That's not how it worked, actually. And Karen, you know this, making a long story short, I actually got my first job was a temporary production assistant job on a show that they were launching called Day to Day. And it was a show that was based in Los Angeles, California. It was a show that Karen worked on. This is how I met Karen almost 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
And it was a show that NPR created because they wanted to get out of the Beltway. They wanted to be much more diverse. They wanted to have a perspective that was not rooted on the East Coast and specifically in DC. They wanted to have a California perspective or a West Coast perspective, more of a West Coast perspective, California being the most populous state in the United States. So that's where I got my start. And I was a temporary production assistant, and I did lots of work for Karen, Karen, who was a correspondent at the time. I was her producer, and she really, I mean, I'm talking a lot, but Karen, you have an amazing, illustrious career. You have not only been a friend, but a mentor to me, and I've been so lucky to have you in my life. When I got to LA, I was bunking with my friend in MacArthur Park in her studio apartment. We were like sleeping in the same bed. I didn't have any money. I was like, this was a temporary job, and I had to work all the holidays. And Karen, I'm like going to get emotional, but Karen invited me to her house for all the holiday dinners because I couldn't be with my family. So after work, she would be like, come over, have Thanksgiving, etc. So going on a little bit of a tangent, but I basically started my career really humbly as a temporary production assistant, and just step by step made it to where I was. And I could not have done it without people like Karen, women of color specifically, and Doug Mitchell, men of color, who really supported me in my career and believed in me from the beginning. So
you came to NPR and you had this gift as a storyteller, which I think a lot of us saw right away. You were insistent on doing it from certain points of view. I remember the host of Day to Day then, Alex Chadwick, said he really pressed for us to hire you when he did an interview with you. And he said, what do you think of when you think of, public radio or national public radio? Shereen goes, blah, 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 which is not untrue in many ways. And so if I can extrapolate from that, what you were saying was, yeah, there was a lot of if, then. On the other hand, what somebody in a hospital emergency room, once said to me, I broke something or did something and I had to go to the ER, and they take all this information about who you are, where you work. We have the information. He says, where do you work? And I said, NPR. And he said, what's that, dear? I said, NPR, National Public Radio. And
exactly.
I'm in LA. Everybody knows what NPR is. And he goes, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with it. I said, you're not familiar with NPR? It's radio. And he goes, oh, sweetie, I only listen to Christian radio. So, okay, that put things in perspective, like right away. We are not the center of the earth.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't listen to us. Everybody didn't grow up sitting in the back seat of their mother's Volvo, right. Being driven to school, going, change the channel, I want to listen to Rafi. They didn't. It was, NPR was a slice of the world. It wasn't the world. And I think that as NPR becomes more diverse, people start to realize, oh, there is more out there. There are more people that we could be grabbing, that sort of thing. So we're at the point now where Shereen was 20 years ago, which was to say, y'all need to listen to some hip hop. Y'all need to listen to some community radio. You need to have different voices that don't all sound like this on the radio, or you're never going to get people like me to listen to it. So that's like the ongoing fight, but it's NPR has become much more diverse than it was
Definitely.
when we first came.
Yes.
It's still not there, but talk a little bit about the public radio or the national public radio, the ambience there when you first got there, how it struck you.
So I came from San Francisco State and Oakland, doing something in Oakland, California, and I was just surrounded by diversity and also surrounded by gente because I was a raza studies major at San Francisco State. So I remember getting to NPR in LA, NPR West, and feeling really shocked about the
How
the
diverse
lack
it was.
of
Yes.
yeah, it was really shocking to
Because
me
this is
actually.
Los Angeles, and Los Angeles did not
Exactly.
like that. Yeah.
And also specifically the lack of Latino presence really shocked me, especially being in Los Angeles and wanting to have a show that was more focused on the West and the Southwest. I couldn't understand that being at the editorial table and in these editorial meetings that we had. And I very clearly remember, because this was the world that I was in, like the books that I was reading, the history that I was studying, the sociology, raza studies was very interdisciplinary. And so, but it was all focused on the Latino community. And so the things that I was pitching was very much from the world that I was surrounded by. And I felt very, very often at that editorial table that the thing that I heard most was, well, how is this important to everyone? Or why is this thing important? Why should we be talking about this on a national level? And I was like, do you all live in Los Angeles? Do you look around? Like, what do you mean? How is this not important to a broad audience? You know, and so I felt like there was constant pushback to my ideas and the things that I brought up around the table. There was a time, there was a young I think he fancied himself a comedian, but a young producer on the show who said one day around the editorial table, where do you get all your ideas? Latino.net. And I was like, everyone laughed. And, you know, he was a funny guy, whatever. I didn't think it was funny. But I knew that there was a feeling like I just wasn't the right culture fit, or I didn't feel like I was the right quote unquote culture fit on the show. And that was tough. I mean, that was really tough. In the beginning of Day to Day, Karen, you remember this, but it was a partnership with slate.com. They were really trying to do something forward thinking and partner with a blog, which was a really cutting edge blog at the time, Slate.
And we should point out that Slate was even less diverse than NPR.
It was. But the show was trying to have more new media. It was a really difficult time to be a young woman of color who was trying to do the thing that she was brought in to do, which was pitch stories about the Latino community, diverse stories about the West, like all the things that they sold me on the job to do. I was trying to do, but it was met with a lot of resistance. And I would say that has changed quite a bit. And I think people like you, Karen, like there's a lot of people who were working even before I got there to make sure that things changed and that NPR actually reflected the public.
Yeah, I would say that probably there's not a person on this Zoom, whether you've been in the business for 6 months or whether you've been in it for like me 20 years, maybe more than that, who hasn't had the experience where you pitch a story or you're really excited about something and somebody in the newsroom says, well, that's like about race. And why does everything have to be about race,
Right.
or ethnicity? And it's like, because everything is about race or ethnicity. When you strip away the onion skin of layers that get to the bottom of a story, you will more often than not find that race, ethnicity, identity is a critical part of what you're reporting on. And I think, as Shereen said, that there's much more reception to that now
Much more.
than there was certainly even 10 years ago.
Yes.
To do that. And unfortunately, I think part of why that is that the past 5 years have been a very hard time for journalists of color, for people of color, for people who have just, paid attention to the news. So this stuff has all of a sudden become part of the national consciousness where it wasn't before. And I think part of the pushback that people like Shereen and I are seeing, and probably that you were seeing, is that the thought was, okay, we'll have our George Floyd moment and we'll say, this is tough. America's got to change. Policing's got to change. All these things have to change because we're not where we want to be. And, a couple of years later, it's like, are we still talking about this? Yes, we are. Because the problems are still here. People are still being killed in the streets. Overt discrimination is still very much a part of the tapestry. Voter suppression, anybody? But for a long time, that the assumption was it's just going to be this spate of time. We just have to ride it out, and then things will go back to being normal. Well, this is normal. This is how it is.
Well, Karen, that's where I kind of want to turn things around a little bit, because you have a longer history and you've seen the ebbs and flows over time where the industry was like, oh, this is an important thing to talk about. And then it all of a sudden isn't an important thing to talk about. And then it's an important thing to talk about again. And then it's not an important thing to talk about. I remember in the 90s, we were talking very much about social justice, race, all of these things in a way that just in the early 2000s went away,
Well,
and
in the 90s, you had, what did you have in the beginning? The cops who beat Rodney King.
That's
Rodney
right.
King's trial.
That's right.
The uprising after Rodney King, and people saw that across the world. I had journalists around the globe who were ringing me up or sending me emails going, what is happening? Tell me why it's happening. So that happened, and then, it went back to normal again, and then something else would happen. You were in Missouri when the whole student uprising thing happened in Mizzou in what, 2015?
Yeah, so I wasn't there. I was in St. Louis. I was in
right.
Ferguson.
Yeah.
Yes, but
Putting out another fire.
but Adrian was there. Adrian
Yeah.
Florido was in Missouri, and I was in Ferguson when Michael Brown was killed, and and so, but for you, I mean,
calmed
even
down a little.
before when you started in the business, when was that? And did you feel like at that point there was a hunger and an interest to talk about these issues in the industry?
I don't know that there was a hunger, but I was always pushing it anyway.
Yeah.
And so, my job, I sort of saw me as the guerrilla journalist able to sneak race into a lot of stories that otherwise wouldn't have gotten them, because none of my editors were people of color. And a lot of the editors that I had early on were subliminally hostile to the idea of including race in the reporting, because they just wanted a story. What did it have to do with race? It's like, dig a little deeper. It actually does. So I would say that after, well, certainly 1992, with when LA kind of blew up and other cities did as well. And then we had a little bit of a respite. And then OJ, the gift that keeps on giving, was very much part of the national dialogue for the duration of that incendiary trial, for afterwards. And I'm trying to think, I don't know what came next. It was sort of like this necklace of things where, you know, you have a pearl and a knot and a pearl and a knot. And so there were plenty of beads of crises that happened that just were part of my beat. I think part of it, frankly, was, well, you know that town, that part of town better than anybody else. So you should go ahead and do
Right.
the story translation. And we don't want to do that. Some people did towards the end, and now lots of people are unafraid to go everywhere. But I think in the beginning, there was some hesitation about that. There was a reporter at the Washington Post, I don't know where she is now, named Idabari Njiri, who was out here in Los Angeles. And during the uprising that followed the Rodney King stuff, a lot of people got a chance to go out, journalists of color got a chance to go out and cover breaking news that they've been asking to do. And they were sort of, you know, shunted to city council meetings. And no shade to that, because we all need to do that as part of our learning process. But they seemed to they felt stuck doing these things when their peers who didn't look like them were sort of rising. And so Rodney King and the upheaval and going out into the neighborhoods was presented as a chance to really, you know, dig in, get yourself into this reporting. And Ida Bari gave an interview to somewhere. She was at the LA Times then. She went to the Washington Post afterwards, where she said the editors were using young reporters of color as cannon fodder. And cannon fodder sort of resonated throughout the journalism community. And people who were not people of color were furious about that, but she wasn't wrong about her observations.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
There is a thing here. I think that there's something that in the industry that really bothers me is there's this expectation, one, that because of our backgrounds and because of maybe the other languages that we speak, that we go into places that can be really hard for us to report on,
Challenging,
and
yes.
very
Mhm.
challenging. And then if you look at how we're paid, we're paid less to do, on average, paid less to do work that is very difficult. We're expected to be bilingual, trilingual, whatever, you know, there's this expectation, oh, we're going to hire you if you're Latino, for example, you better be bilingual. And if you're not bilingual, well, then how can you call yourself Latino? Like, there's just this expectation that we have all of these credentials, and I feel like those credentials have not been supported when it comes to the salaries that we're making. And I think that that's something that we should really talk about as well. I mean, to your point about the expectation that we go out every time there is civil unrest in communities of color, every time there is a story where we have to use our language skills because nobody else seems to have them in the newsroom, but at the same time, we're being paid less than all of these other people in the newsroom who don't have the same language skills. I mean, I think these are things that are still, even as media is diversifying, these are still things that happen all of the time, and we're not being compensated fairly for the gifts that we bring, the things that we have that we bring to the table. It's just like, oh, well, of course you have that. I mean, that's not special, you know.
You grew up speaking that,
yeah, you
so
grew up
you should be
speaking
able to
Spanish.
just switch.
Yeah, and
when really it's what business schools call value added.
yes,
So that you know how to do, you know how to do all the core stuff. And in addition, you can speak another language. Maybe you speak two languages. Maybe you're very familiar with, I don't know, like in my case, community organizers / agitators. It depends on how you view that. Who will talk to me because I had a prior relationship with them, than
exactly.
because I'm here from radio station XYZ. And I think that those are things that Shereen is right, needs to be included in the calculus of what you're worth to your organization. And you should
100%.
lean on that if if you can, get comfortable with leaning on that.
Yeah, those are really valuable skills. And it's wonderful that we can go out and report it at a drop of a hat to do these things, but we should be compensated for that, for those skills. And that should be seen as a skill set that we bring to the organization. That's valuable. Um, yeah. Sorry,
Let's
I'll
talk
stop.
about, that's all right. I want you to talk about Code Switch for a little
Yeah.
bit, because we are going to get to questions soon. You were probably the prime person that lobbied and lobbied and lobbied the higher ups at NPR to turn Code Switch into a podcast. When we first started out in 2013, we were a blog, and we would file stories for NPR shows. So like I would
Yep.
file a lot for All Things Considered or Morning Edition or the weekend shows, but we did not have our own radio outlet. And this was as podcasts were just sort of, people were like, huh, what is that? What time can I catch it on the radio? They weren't really sure what podcasts were. And Shereen wanted to get ahead of the curve because she foresaw that there was, once people figured out what podcasts could do, everybody and their mother was going to have one. Some were going to be really slick and corporately produced. Some were going to be very homespun, and there was stuff in between. So she kept pushing to get a podcast. We got one eventually. It came at an interesting time. There was lots of violence against people of color. There was lots of pressure for more equity. That came with pressures inside and outside the newsroom. Talk about sort of starting up Code Switch and how you convince people that, yes, this is something we need to do.
And I know Karen, you did too, ran into a lot of difficulty telling stories in 3.5 minutes and 8.5 minutes that provided enough historical context and context for people who are listening. And I felt really frustrated by that. I felt like if we're really going to talk about race and we're going to talk about these issues, people need a stronger foundation. And many of us didn't get that in school. And I didn't think we could do justice to these stories without providing more of that context, and you need time to do that. So one, a podcast gives you the ability to have that time to say, hey, this isn't this breaking news story that you are paying attention to right now. Actually, there's a long history that led up to the place that we are today, and we should probably understand that. And it's really important. So there was that. There was also the fact that nobody in my life listened to NPR, going back to what you were saying before. Like, my mom didn't know what NPR was. She had to ask people around what it was. Once she started listening, she found it did not speak to her at all. She's to this day, she's like, I only listen to the stuff that you make because it doesn't feel boring to me. I mean, she really, it was very dull to her. So I wanted something where the audience could be people that we knew, and that they could connect to the stories. And I thought you could do that more with a podcast than you could if you went into the institution and tried to, do your little 3.5 minutes here and there. I just didn't feel like we had the capability of really connecting with the audience that we wanted to, a younger, more diverse audience. If you're only doing that 2 minutes here, 3 minutes there, 8.5 minutes there. So there were a few reasons why, but NPR, I just kept going back and back and back to what NPR management said and leadership said, which is that they really were committed to bringing in new audiences. And that was something they wanted to do. And that they understood that in order to survive and thrive, that they really had to reach out to people that were not just college educated, white, and over 50, for example, which I would say is still the basis
That's
of the
core
NPR.
audience.
Yeah, the core audience. So I thought this is an opportunity. This is a new platform, a new medium. We can speak to people in a different way. We can try things. We can experiment. This might be the way to do it. And we launched in May of 2016, the end of May. I think it was like Memorial Day 2016. And the election was only a few months later. And former President Trump, Donald Trump, was elected. And as we know, he started his campaign by calling Mexicans rapists, criminals. And there was so much racial animus involved in that. Race was such a big storyline. And so we were there and we had a podcast and we had space to talk about this. And we had space to say, hey, this is not new either. There's a long history of politicians doing this exact same thing, these exact same dog whistles. And we were able to explore that. And you were able to do a lot of that work on the podcast. And I think I'm just so grateful. Also, we were able to be human.
Yeah.
And I think that being human and vulnerable and being not just this disembodied voice, but being actual people helped us connect with an audience in a way that we were told throughout our journalism career, you just can't do. Like, that's not something that you do. But we were able to do that and experiment with talking about our own experiences living in the United States as people of color, you as a Black woman, me as an Iranian and Puerto Rican woman. And that really helped us connect with an audience who became loyal listeners. And I think it did influence and inspire a lot of NPR who were like, oh, wait, this works. I mean, to the point where even when there was, they were doing fundraising, they found that even though our audience was small, it was so appreciative, and they would donate money to the cause because they believed so much in it. And so, there was also for NPR who was fundraising, they could see, oh, people really love this and they really care about it. And then it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So.
We are going to take some questions in just a minute, but I have a question for you. I'm not sure how comfortable you are in answering it, but you left NPR to take a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard, stayed at Harvard for a year, and now you're at Berkeley,
Yep.
which I once saw a t-shirt that said, Harvard, the Berkeley of the West, Berkeley of the East.
Yes,
like,
yes.
Okay.
Where's that t-shirt?
Yeah. And you're teaching audio journalism at the J School. Was that the right decision? And if it was, why do you think so? I know it's early days, but sometimes you can settle into something and go, yeah, I was anxious about this, but this is really what I was meant to do.
I have to say, every day I'm like, did I make the right decision? Because as you know, Code Switch had the most downloads that we've ever had. It's very popular. There's a lot of name recognition for the show. And, people are like, why would you leave that at a time when it had become so successful? And I think for me, I've always wanted to teach. I've just always wanted to teach. It's just a thing that I don't know. I feel like I would regret it if I didn't do it, number one. And so this opportunity arose. I wasn't looking for it. It just kind of, they came to me and they said, there's this tenure track position at Berkeley. would you apply? And I have to be honest, Karen, like my first thought was, what, me? Like I couldn't do that. And I applied on a whim because I figured this would never be an opportunity that I would get anyway. And then it came, and then it was like, oh,
Mhm.
I have to really think about this. Is this something I want? And I think, one, I would have regretted it if I hadn't tried. And so I am here and I am trying.
Mhm.
Two, there weren't there I want to be able to inspire a new generation of journalists and kind of help them navigate an institution that I had to navigate in a way that was painful, and hopefully make it less painful for them, and help them over this 2-year period. So, like, make mistakes with me. Let's talk about how we can grow and improve as journalists together in this safe space, rather than doing it in front of everybody in an institution where you don't feel like you belong there necessarily. Also, this is like such an exciting time, I think, to be uh, someone getting into journalism, because we didn't have social media in the way that they have. We didn't have the power of YouTube and TikTok and all of these tools where you can sort of bypass the gatekeepers and get your stories
Yeah.
out there. And I
Yeah.
think that is so exciting. And I want to be able to empower my students to get their stories out, to do it themselves. Like, they have the tools, and there is like a sense of this medium being democratized, or what we do being much more democratized and much easier to get those stories out than it was for us, where we had to go through layers and layers and layers of like gatekeepers to get the stories out. So I think that's really exciting. I just think it's a really exciting time to be uh, a young journalist, and there's just so many stories to tell. And NPR, as a place, if they wanted to work for public media, is really embracing different voices. If you listen to the radio right now, it sounds so different than it did 10 years ago. People are allowed to talk like themselves and be themselves in a way that they were not allowed to do 10 years ago. So I think,
Even 5 years ago.
yes, even 5 years ago,
It's been an amazingly fast evolution.
it has. And so I think, I really want to inspire my students to take advantage of that, get in there, do it. And I think that will be really wonderful and fulfilling. Every day I'm like, was it the right decision? And I still don't know yet. And, we'll see. But nothing is forever. And so if it's not the right decision, I think I love telling stories. I'm never going to stop telling stories. And maybe I'll come back. I've come back and forth multiple times. Nothing is forever, but right now I'm really, really excited about this. And I think there's a lot of potential to make things with my students and to inspire my students to do really good work.
Natalie, I think that was your question. Did Shereen answer it?
Yeah, it's funny because I sent that like probably like mid answer or like,
Mm.
and then you answered it. I
Got
was
you
like, oh,
up.
there you go.
Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
the question? I missed it.
I like
Good.
sent it in the chat. It was just
Oh.
more about, given your experience and all the social issues that are coming up, how did you plan on laying the foundation for your students and what did you want them to take away? So you answered.
Oh,
So
good.
you answered it. You remember.
Yeah.
Which is basically that they're empowered.
Yeah.
They have much more power than I feel like I had when I started, and that's super exciting.
I'm wondering, since we have a couple of minutes left. Oh, here's one from Vanessa. It says, do you have any advice for Latinx journalists who are thinking about reclaiming their Spanish language skills? Thanks for being open about your journey on NPR's Life Kit. I could relate, because not everybody was born speaking Spanish, right?
Yes. Or maybe you were in a family like I was, where you heard Spanish all the time around you, but you spoke back in English, and there is that hurdle to responding in Spanish, and how do you do that? So for those of you who don't know, I have been really trying, especially over the last year, to get much more comfortable with speaking Spanish rather than responding back in English and listening to Spanish. And all I can say is, you know, it is 100% worth doing. Not only has it made me much more confident in just going out and talking to anyone in Spanish out in the world, but it's also helps me connect with my family members who feel much more comfortable speaking in Spanish than they do in English. And so there's this sense of pride that they have in listening to me reclaim the language, even though they wanted me not to speak it for various reasons, because they ran into issues of racism and discrimination because they couldn't speak English well. And I think the reason why, there's a lot of reasons why I speak English better than I speak Spanish. One, you know, I grew up here. Two, my dad is Iranian and he speaks Farsi. My mom spoke Spanish. So English was the common language in the home, but also because my grandparents and my mom had a really hard time and wanted to make things as easy as possible for me. I think this is a story many of us know. And so they were like, English, like if you do that, you're going to get ahead in the world. So it's helped me reconnect with my family. It's helped me be much more confident speaking to just anyone in the world in Spanish. And I think it's going to make my journalism stronger because of that. I think there were times where I was like scared to do a story because I was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed of my Spanish, you know, and I have much more confidence now to walk into that room and ask the questions and try. And I think actually people have been truly supportive. Spanish speakers have been truly supportive, much more so than I thought. I thought there was going to be a lot more judgment, and I'm sure there is that too. So it's really, really worth it. I would say do it. I think for me, learning Spanish in a group with other gente, with other heritage language speakers, changed the game for me completely, because instead of walking into a room and having people say, well, why aren't you as good as me? People who did not have Latino heritage, Latinx heritage, saying that to me, like, why is my Spanish better than yours? Or why is my, you know, instead of that, it was like we were all in this together and we were all supporting each other. So that was amazing. And if you all have access to finding a class for heritage language learners, I would say take it, try it. Listen to my Life Kit episode. There's lots of tips there on how to do this, how to learn your language as an adult. But best thing I've ever done. I wish I would have done it sooner, but you know, it's never too late.
Cindy had a question for you. She wanted to know what media outlets and or journalists are doing a good job covering race and ethnicity and identity. Like now, who jumps out at you, or what jumps out at you?
That's a great question. Our journalists are doing a good job. I mean, I always go to like you know, who's been doing really well is, now I can't think of his, Tremaine Lee.
Oh yeah.
What's his podcast called, Karen?
I don't know.
I'm about to look it
come
up.
across
Hold on.
every now and then. Yeah.
I think he's on MSNBC or NBC. Hold on.
But yeah.
Podcast. Okay, yes. Tremaine Lee has a podcast called Into America, which is excellent. And he's been doing, I think that what's interesting about Tremaine too is he's really taken all of the mediums. Like he has a podcast, he's on television, he's also a writer. He's prolific on social media. He's somebody that I've been really following lately.
You know, he's
who I
not
enjoy.
A journalist per se, but I think Trevor Noah is
Oh,
doing a
right,
really
yeah.
good job of covering race and identity, and he's doing it in a way, I mean, sometimes through laughter, sometimes it's not very funny. You know, the things that he's that he's addressing, but he's doing it in a way that is accessible to people who might feel like, I don't know, I don't know if I want to talk about that. I mean, he's making it part of the national nightly dialogue. And while he's not, a reporter per se, I think he's doing a terrific job.
Somebody else who I've been following and my whole family has been sending me her TikToks, etc., is Bianca Gralao. I hope I'm saying her last name right, but she's in Puerto Rico and she's been doing a lot of coverage about the new crypto money that has been coming into Puerto Rico. There's a tax haven for people who make a lot of money, and so there's a lot of crypto millionaires who have come to Puerto Rico, and it's caused a lot of tension, and much of that has to do with race and identity. And she's been using TikTok in this way that I think is fantastic and fabulous. So I've been following her. My brother is always sending me her TikToks. She's fantastic. She is so cool. I really want to meet her. So Bianca Gralao, I hope I'm saying her last name right. Puerto Rico and race and the wealth gap, and these are things that she's really focusing on. She's amazing and making me very excited right now. You should have her on this, actually. She'd be great.
Suggestions. Yeah, it's funny. I'm sort of blanking out because we spent so much time dealing with race and identity that it's and these people are our colleagues. We know who they are, but it's just I'm having pandemic amnesia right now in terms of being able to pick people out. Oh, great. Thanks, Sabrina. Here it is.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah.
For sure. Carmen put a good question in the chat. I just wanted to point you all to that also.
Where are we?
She's asking,
what do we see as the future of that kind of coverage and reporting work going? I mean, like, will there be, when we started out, we were kind of the race beat. I mean, I started out as the race reporter at NPR because I'd had a bunch of different jobs there. And the guy that they'd hired to be the race reporter left after a short period. And I had said to my editor, if that hole ever opens again, that's me. That's what I want to do. So I'd like to at least be considered for it. And he called up and said, the hole opened up. Do you still want it? Because you would have to take it right away. So I did. But I was it. When I'd go out places and people are like, what are you reporting on for NPR? It's like race, mostly ethnicity.
Yeah.
And they're like, really? That's not NPR. Well, it's going to be. Now you can't throw a rock without hitting some place that has a race team, places that wouldn't have considered it, even 5 years ago. It's like, oh, we don't need to do that. We incorporate that in all of our reporting. Well, you don't. That's why you need a race team. This is what I think people are working toward, to have race fully integrated into all of their reporting, but that's going to take a long time to do, in part because people have to learn how to do it, in part because not everybody agrees with that, so that there's pushback to it, and in part because there's a lot to report on. And so I hope Code Switch will still be reporting and talking about this 5 years from now, but as Shereen says, there's no guarantees.
Can I just add one more thing? Because now everything's like sort of flooding into my brain after that question was asked. The Experiment is a podcast that The Atlantic is doing, and they're looking at race and immigration, like immigrant stories, but also race stories and how they connect with the immigrant experience. That is a fantastic show as well. And they're doing really, really good work.
We're happy for all the good work that's being done, because there's lots of stuff out there that, in fact, the last question I was going to ask you was about this. When you go into journalism, you're always told you have to tell all sides of the story. It's, unless you're you're doing an editorial comment, it's if on the one hand, then on the other hand. And at Code Switch, we always pushed back with some vigor to that, because it's like, there's not two sides to the question of slavery. it should never have happened. Is somebody going to argue that it was useful and it should have? I don't, somebody beside, I won't name names, but anyway, yeah. So I'm wondering, Shereen, how you feel about that whole if, on the other hand, trope, and whether you think it's still legitimate, whether people, and especially journalists of color, should be using this as a guidepost when we report.
I don't think that we should be doing that. I think that there's ways to get multiple perspectives into a story without giving equal weight to both sides, especially if one side, to your point about slavery, who are you going to get to argue the side that, oh, slavery was right and good? That's not something that we would do. Now, there's multiple perspectives on how to fix the problems that slavery created. For example, there's multiple perspectives. There's ways to have multiple perspectives in a story, if I'm just going based on the example that you gave. And that's really, really important. But, and so to give weight to those multiple perspectives and to talk to many people about an issue that there isn't, where you, no, like I'm not going to give a microphone to the other side that says slavery was a good thing.
Yeah.
Genocide is okay. Killing people who are innocent and unarmed is okay. I think that, no, that's not what journalism is about, but it is about getting multiple viewpoints in other ways. And we should do our due diligence that way, if that answers your question.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that we'd done a piece about the history of racist behavior in presidents. And the title of the podcast was actually, "Is Trump Really That Racist?" And there was a lot of joking when we were putting it together. It's like, can't we just say yes and move on? But we talked to a number of historians who said, look, he is problematic, but he's not alone. There was Woodrow Wilson, there was Thomas Jefferson, there was, and they just went down different aspects of problematic behavior and policies to show what they meant. And so you can do it, I think, but I think as Shereen said, it has to be done in a way that shows you've done your homework, and that this is one of many things that we look at and that we'll talk about as we go forward. And it's not the last time we're going to look at it.
Well, I mean, what an incredible conversation. Thank you so much, Shereen and Karen, for your time, for your wisdom. There are so many gems during this hour. I mean, we're just gonna be thinking about this and talking about this for a long time. And thank you so much.
Having us.
Absolutely.
It was nice to see Shereen even on a Zoom.
I know,
We
babe.
used to
I
be
miss you.
neighbors, and she was around the corner, and now she's way.
I used to
up
just
in
walk up the hill.
California. Yeah, so that was nice. And it was nice to meet everybody. If you can get people to write donations to NAHJ, do it. They're out there doing the good, hard work, and it doesn't come cheap or easily.
We appreciate you, Karen.
Yes.
Shereen. And thanks again to our sponsors for this event, the New England News Collaborative and GBH News in Boston. Like Karen said, like Shereen said, hey, if you're able to help us out, we dropped the link in the chat. We're raising money for our scholarship fund. Every dollar counts, for real. And mark your calendars. Our next EnHoraBuena virtual event will be August 11th with digital media executive Charo Enriquez of the New York Times. That's going to be fantastic. I mean, but Shereen and Karen, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for joining.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm going to be in the audience for the next one.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Yeah.
Thanks. Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.